My name is Karl Weber, and I was 19 years old when I first wore the uniform of the Wehrmacht. It was the spring of 1941. The snow had only just melted in my village in Bavaria, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. My mother cried quietly when I left. My father said nothing, he only shook my hand and looked at me as if he already knew I wouldn't return the same. We were told we were defending our homeland, protecting Europe from chaos. We were told we were heroes before we even fought. I wanted to believe it. I was young, proud, and foolish. My unit was small. 10 men under the command of Leutnant Franz Müller. He was a strict man, but not cruel. He had fought in France the year before and carried himself like someone who had seen too much. There was Eric, a farmer's son with a laugh that echoed through the camp, Johann, a quiet boy who could repair anything, and Rudy, who never stopped talking about the girl waiting for him in Hamburg. Our first weeks were full of drills, marching, cleaning rifles, and pretending we were ready for anything. The older soldiers said Russia would be an easy campaign, that it would all be over by Christmas. Even the officers believed it. But one evening, Franz gathered us around the fire and said quietly, "War is not like the posters. Boys, it takes everything from you, and then asks for more." I didn't understand what he meant back then. I thought he was just being dramatic. But in time, I would. When the orders came, we loaded onto trains bound for the east. The carriages were packed with men and equipment, the air thick with smoke and fear disguised as excitement. Someone started singing, and soon the whole train joined in, voices rising over the sound of steel wheels. We thought we were going to make history. We were right, but not in the way we imagined. The train carried us for days. At first, through the fields and forests of Germany, where the people waved and cheered as we passed. Women handed out bread and apples. Children shouted, "Bring us victory." It felt almost like a parade. But the further east we went, the quieter the stations became. The buildings grew smaller, the faces more watchful, and the air colder. When we crossed into Poland, I began to understand that the war was not glorious. The villages were half burned, the roads broken. The people looked at us with fear and hatred mixed together. It was the first time I felt ashamed to wear the uniform. After several weeks, we reached the edge of Ukraine. The countryside stretched wide and endless, golden fields under a pale blue sky. But beauty meant nothing here, only survival mattered. We were attached to the 11th Army, moving south toward Crimea. The officers spoke of taking Sevastopol, the great fortress by the sea. We were told it would be the key to controlling the Black Sea, and that the Russians would surrender once it fell. Our camp was near a small village called Melitopol. We slept in old barns, the straw full of lice, the nights colder than anything I'd known. The food was thin soup and hard bread, but no one complained. We were soldiers now, and complaints didn't change anything. My first real combat came 2 weeks later. We were ordered to clear a small forest where Soviet partisans were hiding. I remember my hands shaking as I loaded my rifle. Eric tried to make a joke, but his voice cracked halfway through. The forest was silent when we entered, only the crunch of snow and our boots breaking the stillness. Then came the gunfire. Sudden, sharp, and everywhere. I dropped to the ground and fired blindly. I don't know if I hit anyone. The air smelled of smoke and blood, and I remember seeing Johann lying face down in the snow. His helmet rolled away. I wanted to crawl to him, but Franz shouted for us to move forward. It lasted maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. When it was over, 3 of ours were dead and 2 wounded. The forest was quiet again, except for the moans of the injured. That night, as I sat by the fire cleaning my rifle, I realized the truth. War wasn't about bravery or glory. It was about staying alive another day. And somewhere deep inside me, a small part of the proud young man I had been, died there in that frozen forest. By the time spring came in 1942, we were exhausted but hardened. The faces around me had changed. New men filled the gaps left by those we had buried in the snow. I was no longer the frightened boy who had left Bavaria. I had learned how to march, how to fight, and how to shut out the sounds of dying men at night. Then, one morning, word spread through the camp. Engineers were bringing in a new weapon, a massive artillery piece unlike anything we had seen before. They said it could destroy bunkers from miles away. Some whispered it was built to break Sevastopol itself. When it arrived, we all stood in silence. The gun was enormous, taller than a house, long as a train car. The man from the artillery unit called it the Schwersgeschts 42, but most of us simply called it Donnerfaust, Thunder Fist. Its presence alone filled us with a strange mix of pride and dread. We watched as engineers and mechanics worked day and night assembling it. Trucks came and went, carrying ammunition the size of tree trunks. The officers spoke excitedly of its power, saying it could crush any Soviet fortification within seconds. Our job was to secure the area while they prepared for its first test. I remember the day clearly. The sky gray, the air heavy. When the order came to fire, everyone stopped what they were doing. The gun roared and the ground trembled beneath our feet. Birds flew from the trees in panic. The shell hit its target, an abandoned structure several kilometers away. And within moments, there was nothing left but smoke and dust. The officers cheered, and even the old sergeant smiled for the first time in weeks. We believed that with weapons like this, we could not lose. But I saw something in Fran's eyes as he watched the smoke rise, a flicker of unease. Later that evening, as we sat by the fire, he said quietly, "Every weapon has its price, Karl. Remember that. What we build to destroy others may someday destroy us." At the time, I didn't understand. To me, the gun was our salvation, the tool that would bring victory and send us home. But Franz had seen more wars than I had years of life. He knew better. As preparations to attack Sevastopol began, our spirits were high. The officers promised a swift victory. We believed them. We had no idea what was waiting for us beyond those hills. By early June 1942, the order came. Sevastopol was to be taken. The city was said to be the most heavily fortified position in the entire Soviet Union. A network of bunkers, tunnels, and coastal batteries carved into the rocks above the Black Sea. We were told it would fall within weeks. None of us believed it would be that easy. The march toward the front was brutal. The sun baked the ground, and our boots filled with dust. We carried everything on our backs: rifles, ammunition, rations, and sometimes even shells for the artillery. Each step felt heavier than the last. The rumble of engines and distant explosions never stopped. When we reached the front lines, I saw what real war looked like. The landscape was torn apart, craters everywhere, burned out vehicles, and the smell of decay lingering in the wind. The Soviets had dug themselves deep, and every inch of ground was paid for in blood. Our Thunderfist artillery was finally brought into position. It took 2 days just to set it up. I was assigned to a small observation post overlooking the valley where the shells would land. When the first bombardment began, it was like the earth itself was splitting open. The sound was so loud it felt like my chest would collapse. Every blast sent dust and debris raining down for minutes afterward. We believed the enemy had to be finished, that nothing human could survive under that kind of fire. But when our infantry advanced, the Soviets were still there. Their guns opened up again, as fierce as ever. I saw men from my company cut down before they even reached cover. The next weeks were a blur of smoke and thunder. Day and night, the artillery fired without pause. We slept in trenches, ate cold rations, and wrote letters we never sent. The Thunder Fist kept roaring, but Sevastopol stood firm. I began to see what Franz had meant when he warned me. The great gun that had filled us with pride was also destroying us. Its recoil cracked the ground we stood on, and the noise shattered our nerves. Some men went mad from the constant bombardment. Others simply stopped speaking. One evening, as we watched the sunset over the burning hills, Eric turned to me and said quietly, "Karl, do you ever think about what we're doing? Look at that city, we're turning it to dust." I didn't answer him. I just watched the smoke drift toward the sea and wondered how much of a world would be left. When it was all over, by July, the siege had turned into a nightmare. We had taken parts of the outer defenses, but Sevastopol refused to die. Every day, we moved forward a few hundred meters, only to be pushed back by nightfall. The Soviets fought like ghosts. You could never see where they were, only feel their presence in the flashes of their guns. Our supplies began to run thin. The rations were smaller, the water tasted of rust, and sleep became a memory. The Thunder Fist kept firing, but it no longer inspired awe. It was just part of the noise of war now, a mechanical heartbeat of destruction. The ground around it was scorched and broken, littered with shell casings and the smell of oil. Franz had grown quieter. He no longer shouted orders with the same energy. His voice was hoarse, his eyes hollow. Once, after a long day of fighting, he said, "The city is dying, Karl, but so are we." The morale in our unit was collapsing. Rudy, who once laughed about everything, now sat in silence, staring at the dirt. Eric had been wounded by shrapnel and sent to the rear. I never saw him again. Johann was long gone. Every night we lit fewer lamps because there were fewer of us left to need them. Then one morning, the Soviets struck back. It started with artillery. Hundreds of shells raining down on us. The explosions were deafening, shaking the earth. I remember clutching my helmet, praying to a god I wasn't sure was listening. When the shelling stopped, they came out of the smoke, yelling, firing, fearless. We fought like cornered animals. It wasn't about orders anymore. Just instinct. The air was thick with dust and blood. When the fighting stopped, our trench was a graveyard. I crawled out, ears ringing, and saw the Thunder Fist lying silent. A direct hit had cracked its barrel. The weapon we thought was unstoppable, destroyed. Franz stood near it, his uniform torn, staring at the smoking ruins. He whispered, "So this is how the war ends. Not with victory, but with silence." That night, I wrote in my small notebook, "If this is glory, I want no part of it." The sky glowed red from fires in the city, and in the distance we could hear the Russians singing. Even in destruction, they found their voices. And for the first time, I wondered if we ever truly had ours. By the end of July, Sevastopol was in ruins, but so were we. The great city by the sea had been reduced to rubble, yet its defenders refused to surrender. The Soviets fought street by street, bunker by bunker. Every step we took forward was met with fierce resistance. We had more guns, more machines, but they had something else. Something unbreakable. Our Thunder Fist was gone, cracked and useless, its massive frame left to rust in the dirt. The engineers abandoned it, calling it a noble failure. But to us it was a tombstone, a symbol of our arrogance. The heat was unbearable. The air stank of smoke, gunpowder, and decay. We carried our rifles like ghosts, half-starved, barely human. I hadn't changed my uniform in weeks. My boots were falling apart. Sometimes I forgot what day it was. One night, as I stood guard near the outskirts of the city, I heard music. Faint at first, then clearer. Someone was playing a harmonica. I followed the sound and found Franz sitting alone, staring into the flames of a dying fire. His face was lit orange, his hands trembling. He said, "Karl, do you know what I dream about? Home. My wife. The sound of rain on our roof. Sometimes I wonder if it still rains there." I didn't know what to say. I just sat beside him, listening. The harmonica in his hands looked too small for a soldier. The next morning, the Soviet counterattack came. It was larger than anything we'd seen. Tanks, artillery, waves of infantry. They came from everywhere at once. Our line collapsed in hours. Radios went silent, and chaos swallowed the front. Franz was hit by shrapnel. I dragged him behind a wall, but he was already fading. His last words were barely a whisper, "Go home, Karl, if you can." When the order finally came to retreat, there was no army left, only fragments. We left the city behind us, its smoke rising into the sky like a funeral pyre. As I walked through the wreckage, I saw Soviet soldiers raising their flag above the fortress. For a long moment, I stopped and watched. I should have felt hatred or shame, but I didn't. All I felt was relief that it was over. That night, I wrote my last words in my notebook. We thought we could conquer the world. But in the end, we couldn't even conquer ourselves. The war would go on, but for me, something had ended in Sevastopol. Not just the battle, but the belief that we were right. And when I finally made my way back west, I carried with me not medals or glory but ghosts. After Sevastopol, nothing felt real anymore. I wandered with what was left of our unit, moving west through the scorched fields of Ukraine. The war had turned into retreat. The officers no longer spoke of victory, only of regrouping, surviving, delaying the inevitable. We traveled by night, hiding by day. Villages that had once cheered us now stared with cold eyes or empty streets. Sometimes we traded our last cigarettes for bread. Sometimes there was nothing to trade. I remember walking past a field where our tanks lay half buried in mud, their gun barrels pointing toward the sky like gravestones. There were so few of us left. Rudy died of infection in a roadside barn. We buried him with no marker, just a piece of his helmet pressed into the dirt. I said a prayer I didn't believe in. Weeks later, we reached a small German outpost near Vinnytsia. The men there looked at us like we were ghosts. One officer asked where our artillery was, where the Thunder Fist had gone. I didn't answer. I just handed him my rifle and said, "It's over." They sent me to a hospital tent. The doctor said I was lucky, malnourished, feverish but alive. I lay on the cot for days, staring at the canvas roof, listening to the distant rumble of guns. Even in the quiet, I could still hear the echo of that great weapon, the Thunder Fist, roaring inside my head. A nurse named Lissel brought me water and bread. She asked where I had fought, and when I told her Sevastopol, she went silent. Then she said softly, "My brother died there." I didn't know what to say. What words could make sense of any of it? When I was strong enough to stand, they gave me orders to return to Germany for rest and reassignment, but the trains were full of wounded and the stations smelled of despair. I watched young recruits bored, faces bright with the same naive fire I once had. As the train moved west, I looked out the window at the endless fields, once full of light, now nothing but ash and bones. I thought about Franz, Erich, Johann, and all the others. They were gone, but somehow I was still here, and I didn't know why. When we crossed back into Germany, the land looked the same. Green hills, red roofs, church bells ringing in the distance. But I wasn't the same man who had left. Something inside me had cracked and would never be whole again. And as the train slowed into my hometown, I realized something simple but terrible. I had survived the war, but I would never escape it. When I stepped off the train in Bavaria, the air smelled of rain and wood smoke, just like the day I had left. The station was quiet, the cobblestones slick beneath my boots. No band, no cheers, no banners. Just a few tired faces watching soldiers return like shadows. My village hadn't changed much, at least not on the surface. The same church stood at the center, the same bakery on the corner. But the people, they looked older, emptier. Every family had lost someone. My mother was standing by the fence when I came up the road. For a moment, she didn't recognize me. My uniform was torn, my face hollow. When she finally realized who I was, she just pressed her hand to her mouth and wept. My father said little. He simply nodded and placed his hand on my shoulder. In his eyes, I saw both pride and sorrow, the kind only a man who's lived through too many losses can understand. For weeks, I tried to live normally again. I chopped wood, helped with repairs, sat quietly at dinner, but the nights were the hardest. I would wake to the sound of artillery in my dreams, the thunder of the great gun, the screams, the smoke. Sometimes I'd wake up standing, thinking I was still in the trenches. My mother would come to my room, light a candle, and whisper, "You're home now, Karl. You're safe." But I wasn't sure I believed her. I started writing again in my small notebook, the same one I'd carried since Sevastopol. I wrote down everything, the faces, the sounds, the cold, the fear. I wanted to remember, but also to understand. I wanted to make sense of why we had gone so far, destroyed so much, and come back with nothing. One evening, I walked to the edge of the forest near our village. The same forest where I'd played as a boy. The wind was gentle, the trees swaying softly. For the first time in years, the silence didn't scare me. It felt peaceful. I thought of Franz and his words, "Every weapon has its price." He had been right. The price wasn't just lives. It was our humanity. As the years passed, the world changed. The war ended, but the memories never truly did. I never married, never went back to the army. I lived quietly, working with my hands, fixing things, maybe trying to repair the world in small ways after helping to break it. Sometimes children from the village would ask me about the war. I'd tell them only one thing. There is no glory in it, only loss. And every time thunder rolled over the mountains, I would close my eyes and hear it again. The echo of the thunder fist fading slowly into the distance, like the heartbeat of a world that had once believed it could never fall. But it did, and so did we.